The war was over. The Vision Hunt decree abolished, and Tomo's death had been avenged. Yet despite all that, Kaede Kazuha was still feeling restless. The joy he had felt from the victory only having lasted for a single month. He had hoped, once this was over, he'd return to the Crux fleet and sail the seas with them. But his longing for travel outweighed the loyalty he felt for the almost pirates of Liyue. So when the time came to decide on what to do, he did not negotiate a new contract with the captain. And he decided to once again set foot onto Liyue. But his thirst for travel didn't keep him there for long. You were a hunter. A good one at that. Using a weapon mostly used by the primitive hilichurls. A custom-made crossbow. It was perfect for hunting medium-sized prey in a single shot. However, you had just finished skinning a large boar when you heard steps approaching you. Knowing the area was infested with treasure hoarders, you quickly loaded your weapon, aiming at where the noise was coming from. Out of a row of bushes stepped a singular man. He wore strange clothing with maple images, had white hair, and amber-colored eyes. The man looked young, maybe a slightly bit older than you. When he laid eyes upon you, he made a noise of confusion. My apologies. I didn't realize I was intruding on someone. Who are you? You barked. He tilted his head calmly. Kaede Kazuha. I'm a traveler from Inazuma, and a vision bearer. You blinked. I thought you people didn't have visions anymore. Kazuha shrugged. News travels slow these days, I see. The vision hunt is over, and despite that, I have never lost my vision to begin with. You gulped. A fight with a vision bearer was impossible to win. What should you do? If you don't mind, please, put your weapon down. With a terrible feeling in your gut, you lowered the crossbow, and Kazuha sighed in relief. I only have a few questions, if that's okay. Go ahead, you replied. I've traveled further than usual. I'd like to know if I'm still in Liyue. You shook your head in confusion. You are in Wolvendom, within the territory of Mondstadt. Kazuha nodded. I see. He had never visited Mondstadt. Of course, he heard of it. The City of Freedom. It sounded romantic. Please, if you don't mind, would you show me the way? You blinked perplexed. You were still covered in the boar's blood. Was this an Inazuma thing where something like that wasn't a deterrent? Oh, I apologize, he said. You're clearly busy. You blinked and then blushed. This head in the clouds type of guy was what you found really attractive. I mean, you can help me, you said sheepishly. Kazuha nodded. Very well, then. The man walked forward, lifting the heavy animal carcass onto his shoulder. Where to? This certainly was a nice change of pace. You led the Inazuma traveler onto a dirt road leading to your home in Springvale. On your way, you bombarded him with questions. You had never left the territory of the City of Freedom and were highly interested in Liyue and Inazuma. Meanwhile, he himself had a few questions. Late in the evening, the two of you arrived in the small village of Springvale. After delivering the carcass for processing, you thought Kazuha would leave you behind to continue towards the main city, while you cleaned yourself up. You thought Kazuha would leave you behind to continue towards the main city while you cleaned yourself and had a change of clothes at home. But instead, he waited at the edge of the large lake that created a natural barrier between your village and Mondstadt proper. Soon you joined him. This place has a strange beauty about itself. You smiled. You think? He looked at you. Despite being completely different nations with different cultures, Liyue and Inazuma are quite similar when it comes to architecture. You chuckled. I guess I never really thought about that. What do you mean? You took a step back, considering your answer. What I mean is, when you're born, you see your own culture firsthand, and you see it as the norm because of that. Kazuha's eyes lit up as you spoke, and it took you a lot of mental strength to not blush. You continued. So, when we learn about a new culture, it's, well, new and exotic. And we focus on all its aspects, making us think we ourselves don't really have a culture. Kazuha gave an amused huff. What? Are you certain you're just a mere hunter and not a philosopher? Finally, you blushed. And he chuckled. Would you accompany me to the city? Your smile got brighter. Of course. He returned your enthusiasm with a smile. Very well, then. While on the old road, Kazuha couldn't keep his eyes off the center of the lake, mentally comparing what he saw with that of Inazuma's city. Meanwhile, you were focused entirely on him. He was handsome, and his childlike enthusiasm was infectious. You couldn't help but wonder how far in life he had traveled. Eventually, he noticed you staring. Are you okay? You nodded. It's just... Your blush intensified. I never met a traveler before, and I'd like to know more about you, if that's okay. He smiled gently. Things like that are better discussed around a campfire. Or at a meal. You giggled. Let me take you out, then. After crossing the bridge, with Kazuha closely behind you, you gave him a guided tour through Mondstadt. It was pleasant. Kazuha was a good listener, and he was enthralled by the large windmills that had been built throughout the town. And his eyes widened upon entering the cathedral built in the name of the animal archon. While the shogun's castle was much larger than the church, it had been built with practicality in mind. It wasn't like this. It wasn't a place of worship. He could feel his animal vision resonate upon entering the building. Seeing the blue gemstone glow on his back as he was awestruck made you chuckle. When the sun began to set, you and him sat down on one of the platforms atop a Mondstadt windmill. The one that he had been eyeing the entire time. He had brought some delicious golden chicken burgers. At first he had looked at the dish perplexed. It reminded him of the Liyue specialty called Mara meat, but this seemed to be a little too big for his mouth. You grinned as you watched him awkwardly bite small pieces of the burger. Once finished, meaning after your burger had been eaten, he had just reached the halfway point. You simply observed him. He leaned back, full and satisfied. Can all people in Mondstadt unhinge their jaws like that? You giggled. I guess you just have big mouths. He blushed slightly at that comment. Your smile turned to a smirk, but you managed to not tease him about it. You still haven't confessed about your past. He looked down at the ground and exhaled. I'm a Ronin, meaning a traveling swordsman from Inazuma. I was one of the few who opposed the Vision Hunt decree. I was on the run with a dear friend of mine, but he made the mistake of challenging the Shogun directly. The sad tone in his voice hurt you, but you had to admit, you felt it. Whenever he spoke, this hidden tragedy inside of him. The Raiden Shogun accepted the terms, knowing full well she would win. And so she did. Then she executed him. I'd witnessed it. Before fleeing myself, I had taken his vision. I just could not let this woman take his vision away. He exhaled sadly. For a time, I signed up with the Crux fleet. I have many friends there, and I know my captain well enough to know that she would sign me up once again if I do so desire. He leaned back, trying to fight his tears, and by accident, your fingers touched. Kazuha retreated. Apologies, he said quickly. You shook your head, taking his hand in yours. It's fine, really. For a moment, the two of you were silent. Then you chuckled, attempting to lighten the mood. You said, My life hasn't been half this, you almost said entertaining. Tension-filled. Nice save, you thought. He could tell what you actually wanted to say, but he appreciated that you didn't. Instead, he simply sighed. So, what now? Until I make a choice, I will travel. Until my heart no longer cries. Honestly, I thought ending this war in Inazuma, avenging him, that would be enough. You leaned your head against the wooden railing of the mill. You need to slow down, but you're unable to do so. Am I right? He looked at you. Are you sure you're not a scholar? You chuckled. Well, Mondstadt is the city of freedom. Sure, we have security in form of the knights. They make sure people follow a set of rules. He huffed. Yes, I can see the irony. The freedom is more symbolic. We have no archon dictating our lives. That's why we have a church. We aren't forced to worship Barbados. We are free to think and do what we want, as long as we don't hurt anyone in the process. You smiled brightly. Naturally, this makes people poets, thinkers, and artists. It's just good that most of us rather do productive things than draw pictures of mountains. Hearing you laugh like that, it made Kazuha feel something. Something warm and soft that he hasn't felt in a while. It was similar to the feeling he got when he was drinking alcohol with the crew of his fleet, but it was more comfy. He squeezed your hand a little tighter out of instinct. Kazuha? You asked. What? He sounded confused. You're crying. Is something wrong? Embarrassed, he whipped away his tears. I'm not crying. The two of you remained silent atop the windmill until the sun vanished beyond the horizon. It's getting late, you said eventually. Yeah. Does this mean goodbye? You asked. He bit his lower lip, his inner voice shouting at him. It doesn't have to be. You blinked, then smiled, your heart beating faster. Are you thinking what I'm thinking? You said, trying to sound seductive. Yes. Travel with me. You opened your mouth a little. That was not what you were thinking. But instead of complaining, you simply lunged forward, gently pressing your lips onto his. It wasn't a wet kiss, and you kept your tongue where it belonged. You were simply testing if what you were feeling right now was something more. And if he didn't resist. Kazuha didn't pull back. And you smiled into him before separating. His face was flushed, just like yours. I'm sorry, you said with embarrassment. No, I didn't mind it at all. He paused. Does this mean you wish to travel with me? You smiled. I want to do much more than that, Kazuha. What do you mean? You took his hand. Let me show you. With a head as red as an apple, you led him back to Springvale. As a mild breeze picked up, filling the air with the sweet scent of flowers. It made you feel relaxed. Yet also like your body was on fire. You could hear your heartbeat pound inside your ears. The tension was killing you. Looking back at your companion, he was just as flustered as you were. Finally you reached your village, and quickly you pushed him aside. After closing the door behind yourself, you turned to face him. He looked away at the ground. I hope I'm not forcing myself onto you, he said. You blinked in response. Kazuha was in your house. You were the one who dragged him here. And you were about to give yourself to him. And travel with him. And still he thought he was the one forcing himself onto you. If your body wasn't ready yet, this certainly pushed you over the edge. You placed your hands on his lips and looked straight into his eyes. No one is forcing anyone, you said. I want you to leave. If you want to leave, I will let you, despite it being very disappointing. He smiled at you, cupping your chin. I will not leave, he said. And then he kissed you. Your heart jumped. It was so much more thoughtful and emotional. Dare say romantic. You felt a seed radiate into you. And gently you maneuvered him through your small home before pushing him onto your bed. There, with your knees to either side of his hips, you unbuttoned your shirt as he opened the belt of his kimono. You awoke when the morning light shined in. Slowly you got up. You were still unclothed, but also Kazuha was gone. Your eyes widened, afraid, and you were about to cry and call yourself an idiot when you suddenly heard a humming from outside. Quickly you got up, hope filling your tummy. Looking through a window, you saw Kazuha meditating. He only wore pants, showing off his perfect body in the morning sun. You sighed in relief and took your blanket, throwing it over yourself before poking your head out of the door. "Kazuha?" He shook his head, then looked back at you. "Good morning." He was smiling happily, filling your heart with nothing but joy.